She noticed him because he didn't move. Everyone else in the cafe shifted in small, restless ways, checking phones, tapping cups, glancing toward the door like they were waiting for something better to happen. He wasn't. He sat near the window with a paper cup that had already gone cold. Hands folded around it like he had forgotten it was there. Not bored, not impatient, just still. It unsettled her. People usually reacted when she walked into her room, sometimes subtle, sometimes obvious. Recognition had a certain shape to it, a tightening in posture, eyes lifting, then quickly pretending they hadn't looked. Nothing from him. She ordered coffee she didn't want. Stood there longer than necessary. The wedding was in 3 hours. Her sister had already called twice. And for reasons she could not explain, she walked over to the man by the window and asked a stranger a question that made no sense. "Would you come to a wedding with me for $2?" He looked at her for a moment after she said it. Not confused, just thinking. That was the first strange thing. Most people would have laughed, or assumed she was joking, or asked 10 questions before answering one. His reaction was quieter than that. He studied her face like he was deciding whether she meant it. Outside, a bus rolled past the window and rattled the glass. She almost took the words back. The idea had sounded simple in her head when she walked into the cafe. Quick solution. Controlled. Temporary. She had learned years ago that problems were easier when they could be handled cleanly. This one hadn't been clean for days. Her sister's wedding. Family gatherings were always worse than board meetings. In a boardroom, people wanted something obvious: investment, influence, approval. Their intentions were visible. Family wanted explanations: why she never brought anyone, why she worked through holidays, why her life looked impressive in interviews but strangely empty when they were sitting across from her at dinner. The questions were never direct. That made them harder. Her sister had tried to sound casual on the phone the night before. "You don't have to bring someone," she had said. Then a pause. "But it might be nice." That pause had followed her all night. Now here she was, standing beside a stranger's table holding coffee she hadn't even tasted. He nodded once. $2? His voice was steady. Low. Not suspicious. She exhaled slowly. "Yes." Another pause. Slightly longer. "Just the wedding." She blinked. Just the wedding. Something about the way he considered the offer made it feel less ridiculous. He wasn't playing along. He was actually deciding. Finally, he pushed the cup aside. All right. That was it. No bargaining. No curiosity about who she was. No questions about the situation she had clearly dropped him into. He stood. Up close, she noticed he was taller than she expected. His coat was worn, but clean. Nothing about him looked careless, just used, like someone who took care of things until they wore out. "Do we need to leave now?" he asked. For a moment, she forgot how to respond. "Yes," she said. "Soon." She pulled 2 bills from her wallet and placed them on the table. He didn't take them. "After," he said. Another unexpected thing. Most people would have taken the money immediately. She slipped the bills back into her wallet. Fine. They walked out together. The cold air outside carried that late afternoon stillness that happens before winter sunsets. Cars moved slowly along the street. The sky had that pale color that never quite looked warm even when the sun was still visible. Her car was parked half a block away. She realized halfway there she hadn't asked his name. "What's your name?" "Daniel." Simple answer. "No last name." She nodded. I know." The words stopped her. He opened the passenger door without looking at her. Just a brief glance toward the street to check traffic before stepping back. "You're in the news sometimes," he added. Not impressed. Not awkward. Just stating a fact. She slid into the driver's seat without responding. That familiar tight feeling settled in her chest, the one she had learned to hide during interviews. Recognition always complicated things, but Daniel didn't seem interested in continuing the topic. He looked out the window while she started the engine. The silence between them felt different than the usual silence she experienced around people. Not tense. Just empty. She wasn't used to that. Most conversations around her had a purpose. Networking, negotiation, positioning. Even casual talk usually had a direction. This silence had none. She pulled into traffic. The wedding venue was 20 minutes away, across the river. Halfway there, she spoke again. "There are a few things you should know." Daniel turned his head slightly. "My family will assume we've been dating for a while," she said. "You don't have to talk much. Just stay near me." "All right." "That's it." That seems simple enough. His calm response irritated her slightly. Nothing about the situation was simple. She had spent the entire week managing investor calls, media requests, and a lawsuit that refused to disappear from headlines. Yet somehow the thing that unsettled her most was walking into a wedding alone. Ridiculous, but the thought of those quiet family questions had made something inside her tighten in ways she didn't like. Daniel didn't seem to notice the tension sitting in the car, or maybe he noticed and chose not to comment. They reached the bridge. The river below was dark and slow. Evening lights were beginning to appear along the shoreline. "Why $2?" he asked suddenly. The question surprised her. She kept her eyes on the road. "It was what I had in my pocket." "That makes sense." He didn't push further. Another silence followed. For reasons she couldn't explain, she glanced toward him. His attention was outside the window again, watching the water pass beneath the bridge. Not curious about her, not impressed by her, not intimidated. Just present. It bothered her more than if he had tried to impress her. They reached the venue just as the sky was fading into that dull gray before sunset. The building stood back from the road, lights already glowing through tall windows. Cars filled the parking lot. Music drifted faintly through the cold air when she stepped out. Her phone vibrated. Her sister. She stared at the screen for a second before silencing it. Daniel closed the passenger door and waited beside the car. He didn't ask who had called. She adjusted the sleeve of her coat, a small habit she always had before public events. Then she turned to him. "One more thing." He listened. "My parents don't like surprises." A faint hint of something crossed his expression. Not amusement exactly. Then this evening might be difficult for them. Despite herself, she almost smiled. Almost. They walked toward the entrance together. Halfway up the path, she felt it again, that familiar tightening across her shoulders. The version of herself people expected was already forming. Confident, controlled, untouchable. She had worn it for years. But as they reached the doors, Daniel spoke quietly beside her. "You look nervous." The words landed gently. No accusation, just observation. She kept her hand on the door handle. "I'm not." Daniel didn't argue. "All right." Something about the way he accepted the answer made it clear he didn't believe her. For reasons she couldn't explain, that unsettled her more than if he had challenged it. Inside, the music grew louder, and the performance began. Warm air moved through the entrance hall when the doors closed behind them. It carried the quiet noise of a gathering already underway. Glasses touching, chairs shifting across the floor, voices layered together in that soft way people speak during weddings. She paused just inside. Not long, just enough to take in the room. The venue had been renovated since the last time she'd seen it. Taller ceilings, lighter walls. Someone had hung small lights across the wooden beams. They reflected off the polished floor in thin lines. Her sister had always liked details. Daniel stood beside her without asking what to do next. That steadiness again. She scanned the room automatically. Years of events had trained her to do it without thinking. Identify exits. Identify cameras. Identify the people who would want something. Her father spotted her first. Of course he did. He moved through the crowd with the same careful posture he'd carried his entire life. Back straight, shoulders squared like every room required a certain kind of discipline. When he noticed Daniel beside her, something in his face shifted. Not anger, just calculation. She knew that expression. Her mother followed his line of sight a second later. The reaction was different. Surprise, then immediate curiosity. Daniel leaned slightly toward her. "Parents?" "Yes." They reached them before she could say anything else. Her father kissed her cheek briefly. "You're late." His voice wasn't harsh, just factual. Traffic would have been an easy excuse. She didn't offer one. Her mother's eyes were already on Daniel. And this is? A small silence settled around the four of them. She realized she had never decided what story to use. Daniel solved the problem before she could. I'm Daniel, he said, extending his hand calmly. Her father shook it. Firm. Measured. How do you two know each other? Her mother asked. Daniel glanced toward her, not asking permission, just giving her the space to answer if she wanted. She didn't. We met recently, he said instead. That was all. Not defensive. Not vague enough to sound suspicious either. Just enough information to close the question. Her mother studied him another moment, then smiled politely. Well, it's nice to meet you, Daniel. A call from across the room pulled her parents away before anything else could be asked. Some relative she hadn't seen in years waving them over with urgent enthusiasm. They left. The air around her loosened slightly. Daniel looked toward the large hall where rows of chairs had been arranged. Ceremony soon? Yes. Guests were beginning to take seats. Soft music drifted through the room from somewhere near the back. She noticed several people staring, recognition spreading quietly. It always moved like that. One person whispering to another, phones appearing briefly. Daniel seemed unaware of it, or uninterested. They walked to the chairs together. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't attempt any gesture that might suggest familiarity. That absence felt oddly respectful. They sat near the aisle. For a while, neither of them spoke. The room filled slowly. Programs rustled. Someone laughed. Too loudly near the back, a child whispered questions to a tired-looking parent. Ordinary sounds, the kind she rarely experienced without an agenda attached. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. Big family? He asked quietly. Large enough. Close. She thought about the question. Complicated. He nodded once like that answer explained everything. The music changed. Guests began settling more quickly now. Her sister would be waiting somewhere behind the side doors, adjusting her dress, probably pacing. She tried to picture that. The image felt distant. She had missed most of the preparations. Work had given her an excuse she hadn't questioned too closely. Daniel spoke again. Your sister nervous? Probably. You? She turned toward him. Why would I be nervous? You're watching the door like you expect something to go wrong. The observation was quiet, precise. She hadn't realized she was doing that. I always look for exits, she said. That sounds like a habit. It is. He didn't ask where the habit came from. The lights dimmed slightly. Conversations faded. The officiant stepped forward near the front. The ceremony was beginning. For the next 20 minutes, the room settled into that careful stillness weddings create. Words about commitment, about patience, about choosing another person again and again. She listened without meaning to. Certain phrases caught in her mind longer than others, not because they were beautiful, because they sounded fragile. Like promises people hoped would survive the parts of life no one described in speeches. Beside her, Daniel sat quietly, hands folded, not fidgeting, not checking his phone, just present. When the ceremony ended, applause filled the room. Her sister's face lit bright with relief as she walked back down the aisle with her new husband. People stood. Music swelled again. Movement returned. Daniel waited while the crowd began drifting toward the reception hall. You did well, he said. She frowned slightly. At what? Looking like you belong here. Something about the sentence made her pause. Before she could respond, someone called her name. A man in an expensive suit approached quickly, smiling in that practiced way she recognized immediately. Investor. She had forgotten he was related to the groom somehow. Good to see you, he said warmly. His eyes flicked toward Daniel. And this must be my date, she said before he could finish. The word sounded strange leaving her mouth. The investor nodded approvingly. Well, nice to finally see you take an evening off. Daniel shook his hand politely. The conversation shifted into familiar territory almost immediately. Market conditions. Expansion rumors. The lawsuit that had appeared in headlines 2 weeks earlier? She answered automatically. Calm. Professional. Daniel remained silent beside her. After a few minutes, the man was pulled away by another conversation. She exhaled. That happens a lot? Daniel asked. Yes. Looks tiring. It's normal. He studied her face for a moment. You change when they talk to you. She stiffened slightly. What do you mean? You stand straighter, he said. Your voice gets quieter. That was accurate, uncomfortably accurate. That's called professionalism. Maybe. He didn't argue. The reception hall doors opened. Light spilled across the floor along with louder music and the smell of food. Guests began moving inside. Daniel stepped aside to let her pass first. As they walked into the larger room, she noticed something she hadn't expected. People weren't looking at her the way they usually did at public events. Their attention moved between her and Daniel. Curious. Trying to understand the equation. That attention pressed lightly against the carefully constructed version of herself she had worn for years. Beside her, Daniel remained the same steady presence he had been since the café. Unbothered. Unimpressed. Quiet. For the first time that evening, she wondered something she hadn't considered before. What kind of life produced that kind of calm? The question stayed with her longer than she liked. The reception hall was louder than the ceremony room. Music drifted through tall speakers near the stage, something soft enough for conversation but steady enough to fill the empty spaces between voices. Round tables covered most of the floor. Glasses caught the light each time someone moved. Her sister stood near the center, surrounded by relatives, laughing. The sound carried across the room easily. For a moment, she simply watched. Daniel stood beside her without speaking. His attention moved around the room slowly, not searching for anything in particular, just noticing things. You don't have to stay next to me the whole time, she said. He glanced at her. That was the job. You can sit, eat, talk to people. That was not the job. Something about the way he said it made her pause. It wasn't stubbornness, just clarity. She nodded once. Fine. They found their table near the side of the room. A small card with her name printed neatly across the front waited beside a folded napkin. Someone had added another chair. Her sister had prepared for the possibility, after all. Daniel pulled it back slightly before sitting. She noticed the way he checked the chair's balance first, pressing lightly on the back like he didn't quite trust it. Small habits. Quiet ones. The kind that came from paying attention. People began filling the nearby seats. Cousins she barely remembered. An older aunt who greeted her with immediate warmth and 3 questions at once. Daniel answered politely when spoken to, not much more. The first plates of food arrived. For a while, the conversation around the table flowed without her involvement. Stories about childhood vacations, complaints about travel delays, laughter that felt easy and familiar to everyone except her. Daniel ate slowly, not distracted, not rushing. She realized she had barely touched her own plate. You should eat, he said quietly. I'm not hungry. You've been up since morning. She turned toward him. How do you know that? You checked your phone 3 times during the ceremony, he said, all before 6. That observation sat between them for a moment. You notice a lot. It's useful. She pushed the fork through the food without lifting it. Across the room, someone called her name again. A woman from a media company approached the table with careful excitement. I didn't expect to see you here, the woman said. It's my sister's wedding. Of course, I just meant. Her eyes shifted briefly toward Daniel. Nice to meet you, she added quickly. Daniel nodded. Daniel. The woman lingered another moment, clearly deciding whether to ask for a comment about something work-related. Finally, she thought better of it and moved on. Daniel watched her leave. That happens a lot too? He asked. Yes. He returned to his food. You live inside a lot of conversations that aren't really conversations. She didn't respond. Because he was right. After dinner, the music grew louder. The first dance began near the center of the floor. Guests gathered loosely around the edges while her sister and her new husband moved carefully through the slow rhythm. Daniel watched quietly. Your sister looks happy, he said. She wanted this wedding for years. Did you? The question surprised her. What? A wedding, he said. Did you ever want one? She felt the old instinct to give a quick, controlled answer. Instead, she said the first thing that came to mind. I wanted stability. Daniel nodded slowly. That's not always the same thing. The dance ended. Applause followed. Guests began drifting toward the floor. Someone pulled her sister's husband into another dance almost immediately. Laughter rose again. Her sister spotted her from across the room and waved her over. She hesitated. Daniel noticed. You should go, he said. I will. But she didn't move yet. Something about stepping into that circle of family attention felt heavier than she expected. Daniel stood. I'll be here. She looked up at him. You don't want to dance. He smiled faintly. I think that might raise more questions than answers. Despite herself, she let out a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Then she crossed the room. Her sister wrapped her in a quick embrace before she could say anything. You actually came, her sister whispered. I said I would. I know, but you almost never leave work. Her sister pulled back slightly and glanced over her shoulder. That him? Yes. Her sister studied Daniel from across the room. He looks calm. He is. That's new for you. The comment was gentle, but it landed somewhere deeper than she expected. What does that mean? You usually bring people who look like they're presenting something, her sister said. A resume, a pitch. Daniel, meanwhile, had moved slightly away from the table to give space to the people still sitting there. He stood near one of the tall windows now, hands in his coat pockets, watching the room, not trying to belong, just there. Her sister noticed the difference too. You look different tonight, she said quietly. How? Less guarded. She almost corrected that immediately. But something in her sister's expression stopped her. Across the room, Daniel's phone vibrated briefly. He stepped toward the window and answered it quietly. His voice softened in a way she hadn't heard before. Yes, sweetheart, he said. A small pause. No, I'm not home yet. Another pause. Did you finish your drawing? He listened for a while, then smiled. The expression changed his whole face. Not dramatic, just warm. Her sister noticed the shift in her attention. What? She asked. She shook her head slightly. Nothing. But as Daniel ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, a quiet question settled into her thoughts. Sweetheart. Daughter, probably. She hadn't asked. The realization felt oddly important, not because it complicated the arrangement, because it explained something about the steadiness she had noticed since the café. Some people carried responsibility the way others carried ambition, quietly, without performance. Across the room, Daniel caught her looking at him. He didn't look away, just waited. For reasons she couldn't explain, that simple patience unsettled her more than the entire room full of attention. When she returned to the table, Daniel had moved back to his chair. The music had shifted into something faster. A few couples were already trying to follow the rhythm on the dance floor, laughing when they missed steps. Her seat was still half full. The food had gone cold. Daniel noticed her looking at it. You didn't eat much. I'm fine. He didn't respond right away, just folded his napkin carefully and placed it beside the plate. Your sister seems kind, he said. She is. You don't see her often. It wasn't phrased as a question. No. Work? Yes. He nodded slowly. Across the room, her sister spun once under her husband's arm, laughing loudly when she nearly lost balance. Someone clapped. Someone else whistled. For a moment, the whole room seemed to lean toward that small center of happiness. Daniel watched it quietly. Looks like she trusted the right person, he said. She's always been better at that than I am. Trust? Yes. The words settled heavier than she intended. Daniel leaned back slightly. That's a difficult skill. You say that like you know. I do. He said it simply. No elaboration. A waiter appeared to refill glasses. The soft clink of bottles against glass briefly interrupted the music. Daniel thanked him. Another small thing she noticed. Most people in rooms like this didn't bother. Her phone buzzed again on the table. She glanced down. 3 emails. 2 messages. A missed call from someone on the legal team. The familiar pull of responsibility tightened inside her chest. Daniel saw the screen light up. You should probably answer that. I will later. Are you sure? She turned the phone over. Yes. The decision felt strange, like ignoring gravity. For years she had built a life where every message demanded attention. Every problem expected a response. Letting the phone sit there unanswered felt almost irresponsible. But also, quiet. Daniel seemed to understand that. He didn't bring it up again. The band changed songs. A slower one this time. More couples drifted toward the floor. An older man from another table approached with polite enthusiasm. Mind if I borrow your date for a dance? He asked her with a grin. She looked up, surprised. Before she could answer, Daniel spoke. I'm afraid I'm not much of a dancer. The man laughed. That makes two of us. He wandered off toward another group. She glanced at Daniel. You really don't dance? I didn't say that. Then why decline? Daniel considered the question. Because that man wanted to make a joke, he said, not dance. The observation was quiet but accurate. She leaned back in her chair slightly. You read people well. Sometimes. You didn't read me in the cafe. Yes, I did. Her eyebrows lifted. Then why agree? Daniel took a slow sip of water. Because you look like someone trying very hard not to ask for help. The sentence landed softly. But it stayed there. She looked away first. Across the hall, a group of her cousins had gathered near the bar. Someone was telling a story that kept collapsing into laughter. Normal life. The kind that existed without headlines. Daniel followed her gaze. You grew up around them. Yes. Looks loud. It was. You left early. Another observation. You assume a lot. Not really. Then how do you know? Daniel rested his forearms on the table. You watch rooms the way people do when they're used to leaving them. For a moment she couldn't think of a reply. Because he was right again. The music shifted once more. This time her sister crossed the room toward their table. Her dress moved carefully between chairs. You're hiding, her sister said as she arrived. I'm sitting. That's not the same thing. Her sister turned toward Daniel. You're Daniel, right? Yes. She extended her hand warmly. Thank you for bringing her. Daniel shook it. I think she brought me. Her sister laughed. That sounds more accurate. Then she leaned closer to her. Dance with me. I don't dance. Her sister tilted her head. You used to. That was a long time ago. Exactly. She hesitated. The dance floor was crowded now. People were watching. The old instinct tightened again. Control the image. Avoid unnecessary attention. Her sister waited patiently. Daniel spoke quietly beside her. It might make her happy. She glanced at him. You're supposed to be on my side. I am. That answer didn't explain anything, but it also didn't argue. Her sister reached down and took her hand before she could overthink it. Come on. The music carried them toward the center of the floor. The steps were simple, slow, familiar. In a distant way her body still remembered. Her sister smiled at her. You're thinking too much. I always think too much. That's true. They moved through the rhythm for a while without speaking. Then her sister said something softly. You deserve something normal too. The words caught her off guard. Normal isn't really my life. Maybe it could be. She glanced toward the table. Daniel was watching the dance floor, not staring, just observing quietly. Who is he? Her sister asked. I met him today. Her sister blinked. Today? Yes. And you brought him here? Yes. Her sister studied Daniel again across the room. Then she looked back at her. That might be the most spontaneous thing you've done in 10 years. I know. The music ended. Applause followed. They walked back toward the table together. Daniel stood when they approached. Her sister smiled at him again. You're good for her, she said. Daniel looked briefly confused. We just met. Sometimes that's enough, her sister replied. Then she returned to the dance floor before either of them could respond. Daniel pulled the chair out for her again. She sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she said quietly, "You didn't mention your daughter." He looked up. "You heard that?" "Yes." Daniel nodded once. "Her name is Lily." "How old?" "7." She pictured the phone call by the window again. The warmth in his voice. "Where is she tonight?" "With my neighbor," he said, "until I get home." The answer was simple, but something about it stayed with her. Not dramatic, just real. Across the room, the celebration continued. Laughter, music, people building memories that would last long after the night ended. She glanced at Daniel again, the quiet man she had offered $2 in a café only hours earlier, and for the first time that evening, another thought slipped into her mind. Not about the wedding, not about appearances. Something else. She wondered what his life looked like after rooms like this emptied, and why that question felt heavier than it should. The reception slowly changed shape as the night moved forward. Early in the evening, people stayed close to their tables, conversations careful, postures neat, the kind of politeness that sits on top of a room before anyone relaxes. Later, that loosened. Jackets came off. Chairs shifted out of place. Laughter grew louder and less organized. Her sister was somewhere near the center again, surrounded by friends who had known her since college. She watched from the table. Daniel had finished his second glass of water. The waiter had tried to offer wine earlier. Daniel had declined with a small shake of his head. "You don't drink?" she asked. "Not when I'm responsible for getting home." The answer was simple. "Your daughter," she said. "Yes." He didn't expand. Across the room, someone recognized her again. A man approached halfway toward the table before stopping, clearly deciding whether interrupting would be appropriate. Daniel noticed the hesitation. "That happens often too?" he asked quietly. "Yes." The man eventually turned away, choosing another conversation instead. Daniel leaned slightly closer. "You've built a life where people approach carefully. That's called respect. Sometimes." She heard the second meaning inside the word. Fear. Distance. Control. The music softened for a moment as the band adjusted equipment. For a few seconds, the room filled with nothing but overlapping voices. Daniel glanced toward the large windows along the far wall. It was fully dark outside now. Reflections of the room floated across the glass like a second gathering. "You ever miss being anonymous?" he asked. The question came without judgment, just curiosity. "I never had that," she said. "That's not true." "Why do you say that?" "Everyone has it once." She thought about that. He was probably right, but the version of her life that existed before the company grew into something public felt distant now, like remembering a place that had slowly disappeared behind construction. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair. "You left home early." The statement made her blink. "How do you know that?" "You listen to your sister differently than the rest of the room," he said. She studied him. "That's a strange way to draw conclusions." "Maybe. You could be wrong." "I could." But he didn't look like he thought he was. For a moment she considered asking how he had learned to observe people like that. Instead, she asked something else. "What do you do for work?" Daniel's fingers traced the edge of the napkin slowly before answering. "Carpentry." "You build houses?" "Sometimes." "What else?" "Repair work mostly." "Doors, floors." "Floors, old staircases." The answer carried the quiet steadiness she had come to expect from him. Hands-on work. Physical. The opposite of the abstract world she spent most of her time inside. "You enjoy it?" she asked. "Yes." No hesitation. That certainty caught her attention. Most executives she spoke with described their work using layers of strategy and ambition. Enjoyment rarely entered the conversation. But Daniel's answer had been immediate. "What about the money?" she asked. He looked slightly amused. "It pays enough." "That doesn't sound like much of a plan." "It's a very clear plan." She tilted her head. "How so?" "My daughter eats," he said. "Our roof doesn't leak. I sleep well." He shrugged lightly. "That's most of the plan." She found herself studying his face again. There was no defensiveness in his tone. No apology. Just a quiet acceptance of what mattered to him. Across the room, her father appeared again, speaking with several relatives near the bar. His posture was still as formal as it had been earlier in the evening. Her father's eyes moved across the room. They stopped when they reached her table, then shifted briefly toward Daniel. A small crease formed between his eyebrows. Daniel noticed the look. "Your father doesn't approve," he said. "That's not new." "Of me?" "Of unpredictability." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's understandable." She almost laughed at that. "Is it?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because people who build things carefully don't like variables." He said it the same way he had described repairing doors. Matter of fact. She folded her hands together on the table. "You make it sound simple." "It often is." Her father began walking toward them. The path through the room felt deliberate. Daniel noticed. "He's coming over." "I can see that." Her father stopped beside the table. "Daniel." His voice carried polite restraint. "Yes?" Her father gestured toward the quieter hallway outside the reception hall. "Would you mind speaking with me for a moment?" The request wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't casual either. Daniel glanced toward her, not asking permission, just acknowledging the situation. She gave a small nod. "That's fine." Daniel stood. "I'll be right back." They walked toward the hallway together. She watched them go. The conversation disappeared behind the closed door. Music filled the room again. People continued dancing. But something inside her tightened quietly. Her father had a particular way of asking questions. Careful, direct, relentless. She had grown up under that kind of attention. Now Daniel was stepping into it. Across the room, her sister caught her eye again. She mouthed a single question. "Everything okay?" She nodded, but her attention stayed fixed on the hallway door. Minutes passed, longer than she expected. The band started another song. Couples returned to the dance floor. Still no sign of Daniel. A familiar tension settled across her shoulders. Control slipping, situations moving without her influence. Finally, the hallway door opened. Daniel stepped back into the room. Her father followed a moment later. Neither of them looked angry, but something had shifted. Daniel walked back toward the table, his expression calm, maybe slightly more thoughtful than before. Her father returned to the bar without another glance. Daniel sat down again. She waited. "You're not going to ask?" he said. "I was giving you time." Daniel picked up his glass. "Your father asked a lot of questions." "I'm sure he did. He wanted to know how we met." "What did you tell him?" "The truth." She felt a small drop of surprise in her stomach. "And? He didn't believe it? That sounds like him." Daniel nodded. "He also asked about my past. And—" Daniel set the glass down carefully. "I think he was trying to understand why you chose me." She held his gaze. "And what did you tell him?" Daniel considered the question for a moment. "Nothing. Nothing. That's your answer to give," he said. The band reached the louder part of the song. Applause rose again around them. But something about Daniel's restraint lingered. Her father had been searching for explanations. Daniel had refused to supply one. Not defensive, not confrontational, just respectful. For the first time that evening, she realized something quietly unsettling. The man she had hired for $2 had just protected her privacy better than most people in her professional life ever had. And he had done it without asking for anything in return. The music faded into another slower song. By now the room had reached that stage where time loosened its grip. People no longer checked watches. Conversations stretched. Laughter came easier. But her attention stayed on the space between her and Daniel. Her father was still at the bar across the room, not watching them directly anymore. That almost made it stranger. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Answer his questions." Daniel shrugged slightly. "They were reasonable questions. Not all of them." "That's true." She leaned forward a little. "He asked about your past?" "Yes." "And you answered?" "Some of it." "Why?" Daniel rested his hands loosely on the table. "Because he was worried about you." The answer came without hesitation. She frowned slightly. "My father worries about reputation." Those two things aren't always separate. She looked toward the bar again. Her father was speaking with an older uncle now, but his posture was still stiff. "You told him about Lily?" she asked. "Yes." "And?" He asked where her mother is. A pause settled between them. She wasn't sure if the question had been fair. Daniel seemed calm about it. "Where is she?" she asked quietly. "Gone." The word wasn't dramatic, just final. He didn't elaborate. She didn't push, but the weight of the answer stayed there. Across the room, someone began a toast. Glasses lifted. The crowd quieted slightly while a cousin attempted a speech that kept drifting between heartfelt and chaotic. Daniel listened politely. "You're good at silence," she said after a moment. He smiled faintly. "It's a useful habit." "For what?" "Understanding what people actually mean." She studied him again. Earlier that evening she had assumed his calm came from simplicity, a quiet life, clear priorities. But the way he listened suggested something else. Experience. Not necessarily easy experience. The toast ended in laughter. Applause filled the room again. Daniel glanced down briefly. His phone lit up on the table. He checked it quickly. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes." "Lily?" "Yes." A small smile crossed his face again. She finished her drawing. "What was it?" "Apparently a horse." "You sound impressed." "I've seen the horse," he said. "It looks more like a potato with legs." Despite herself, she laughed. The sound surprised both of them. Not loud, but real. Daniel noticed. "You should do that more often." "What?" "Laugh." "I do. Not tonight." She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Because he was probably right. Across the hall, a few guests had started leaving. Jackets reappeared. Goodbyes began forming near the entrance. The night was slowly approaching its natural end. Her sister approached the table again, slightly flushed from dancing. "You're still here," she said with a grin. "Where else would I be? You usually disappear early." "That's work events." Her sister leaned down toward Daniel. "You surviving?" "Very well." She studied him for a moment. "You're patient." "I try to be." Her sister looked back at her. "He's very different from the people you usually bring around." "That's because I don't usually bring people around." "Exactly." Her sister's expression softened slightly. "Stay a little longer," she said. "I like seeing you here." Then she returned to the dance floor again. Daniel watched her go. "She cares about you," he said. "I know. Do you see her much?" "No." "Why not?" The question wasn't accusatory, just curious. She looked down at her hands. "Life moves fast." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Life always moves fast," he said. "That's not the real reason." She felt that quiet pressure again, the kind his observations created. "What do you think the real reason is?" she asked. "You build something big," he said. "Yes, and things that big tend to fill every empty space." The sentence settled slowly in her thoughts. She had heard similar advice before from consultants, mentors, even journalists trying to understand her career, but it had never sounded this simple or this accurate. A group of guests passed their table on the way to the exit. Someone recognized her and waved politely. She waved back. Daniel noticed the interaction. "You handle attention well," he said. "You learn. Does it ever get tiring?" "Yes." "Why keep doing it?" The question lingered longer than the others, because the answer wasn't as clean as it used to be. "I built something important," she said finally. "That's true. And people depend on it." "That's also true." He waited. But she didn't continue, because the rest of the answer felt harder to say. Across the room, the band announced the final song of the night. Several couples moved toward the floor again. The lights dimmed slightly. Daniel glanced at the dance floor. "Looks like the last one." "Yes." "Are you going to dance again?" "No." He stood. "I should probably get home soon." She felt a brief flicker of something unexpected. Disappointment. The realization caught her off guard. "You don't have to rush," she said. "I told Lily I'd read to her when I got back." That answer made sense. Still, of course. He reached for his coat. She stood as well. The room around them was slowly thinning, guests hugging goodbye, chairs being stacked near the back wall. They walked toward the exit together. Outside, the air had grown colder. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the pavement. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel reached into his pocket and placed 2 folded bills into her hand. Her eyebrows lifted. "You forgot something," he said. She looked down. The same $2 she had offered in the cafe. "You earned it," she said. Daniel shook his head. "That wasn't the agreement." She frowned slightly. "Then what was the agreement?" Daniel thought for a moment. "You needed someone to stand beside you tonight," he said. "I did. I did that." "Yes. So we're even." The simplicity of the statement left her momentarily silent. Most people in her world negotiated everything. Value always attached to time. Daniel stepped back slightly toward the sidewalk. "Thank you for the evening," he said. "You're leaving?" "Yes." Just like that. Just like that. For a moment she considered asking for his number, or offering something more substantial than $2. But the words didn't come immediately. Daniel gave a small nod. "Good night." He turned and started walking toward the far end of the lot. The darkness swallowed him gradually between the parked cars. She stood there longer than she expected, the folded bills still resting in her hand. Something about the night had shifted in a way she didn't fully understand yet. Not dramatic, just different. Inside the venue, the last song ended. Applause echoed faintly through the doors, but her attention remained fixed on the empty stretch of pavement where Daniel had disappeared. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the quiet discomfort of a question she couldn't easily answer. Why had a stranger with 2 quiet hours changed the way the entire evening felt? The thought stayed with her as the cold air settled around the parking lot. The wedding ended quietly. Not with a dramatic moment, not with some final scene people would remember later. Just small endings. Chairs being folded, music equipment packed into cases, her sister hugging people near the door while someone collected leftover flowers from the tables. She stayed longer than she planned, mostly standing near the entrance, answering the last polite conversations that found their way toward her. A few relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, one distant cousin, asking about her company in a careful voice. Eventually the room thinned. Her sister found her again near the coat rack. "You're still here," she said. "I told you I'd stay." Her sister studied her face. "You look like you're thinking about something." "I usually am." "That's not what I meant." They stood there for a moment while someone carried a box of decorations past them. Her sister lowered her voice slightly. "Where did he go?" "He left." "Already?" "He has a daughter." Her sister smiled faintly. "That explains a lot." "What does?" The calm. She didn't answer. Her sister slipped her arms around her briefly. "I'm glad you came tonight," she said. "Me too." "Don't disappear for another year." "I won't." They both knew promises like that were fragile. Still, they let the moment exist. Her sister returned to help her husband gather things near the stage. She finally walked outside. The parking lot had emptied. Only a few cars remained now. Cold air had settled deeper across the pavement. The quiet felt heavier after the music. She stood beside her car for a moment before unlocking it. The silence gave her space to notice something uncomfortable. Her phone. She had ignored it for hours. That almost never happened. When she turned it over again, the screen lit immediately. Messages stacked across the display. Legal updates. Board notifications. 2 missed calls from a reporter. 1 message from an assistant asking if she had seen the latest article. The familiar weight returned instantly. Responsibility. Expectation. Consequence. She opened the article link. The headline appeared first. Sharp. Carefully written to provoke attention. The lawsuit again. A former partner making public accusations. Financial misconduct. Ethical questions. None of it new. But tonight the language had grown more aggressive. The article suggested instability inside the company, pressure from investors, speculation about leadership. Her name repeated several times. She closed the screen. Cold air brushed across the parking lot again. Normally, something like this would have pulled her immediately into action, calls, strategy, damage control. Instead, she stood there for a moment longer and thought about a man walking across the same pavement less than 20 minutes earlier. Carpentry, repairing doors, reading bedtime stories, a life measured differently. The comparison felt unfair, but it stayed there anyway. Eventually, she got into the car. The engine started quietly. As she drove toward the main road, the wedding venue faded behind her in the rearview mirror. City lights appeared gradually ahead. Her phone vibrated again on the passenger seat. This time, she answered. Yes. Her legal advisor spoke quickly on the other end. The board was concerned. Investors were asking questions. They needed a response ready by morning. She listened without interrupting. Her voice returned to its usual calm when she spoke again. I'll review everything tonight, she said. Good, the advisor replied. This could escalate. I understand. The call ended. The road ahead curved along the river. Traffic was light now. For a few minutes, she drove without turning on the radio. The quiet felt familiar again. But something about it had changed slightly. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Daniel standing near the cafe window earlier that afternoon, hands folded around the cup he had forgotten to drink. Still, unimpressed, unconcerned with the reputation that seemed to define every room she entered. She found herself wondering where he was right now. Probably home. A small apartment somewhere. A 7-year-old girl waiting with a drawing that looked like a potato with legs. The image settled in her thoughts with surprising clarity. Her phone vibrated again. Another message from the board. Another reminder of the world waiting for her response. She glanced at the 2 folded bills sitting in the small compartment beside the gear shift. The same $2. Daniel had left them in her hand like a quiet refusal. She hadn't noticed until she reached the car. For reasons she couldn't explain, she hadn't put them back in her wallet. They stayed there as she drove through the dark streets. A small reminder of something simple, something unmeasured, and something she hadn't realized she needed until the moment it was gone. The city grew brighter ahead, responsibility waiting, control returning. But the memory of that calm, steady presence refused to disappear as quickly as everything else in her life usually did. Morning came too quickly. She woke before the alarm, the way she usually did when something was already waiting for her attention. The apartment was quiet. High windows let in a thin gray light from the city outside. Traffic had already started below, distant and steady. Her phone sat on the nightstand. Dozens of notifications. She didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, she lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling while the events of the previous night arranged themselves slowly in her mind. The wedding, her sister's laughter, her father's careful questions. Daniel standing near the window with his phone, his voice soft when he spoke to his daughter. That part stayed the clearest. Eventually, she sat up and picked up the phone. Messages opened quickly, emails from the legal team, updates from the board, 2 investors requesting calls before noon, and the article again, now shared across several financial sites. Speculation spreading, language sharpening. She moved through it with practiced efficiency, replying where necessary, marking what could wait. The routine felt familiar, controlled. By the time she reached the kitchen, her mind had already shifted into work mode. Coffee brewed, laptop opened, documents spread across the counter. The company's public statement needed careful wording, enough confidence to calm investors, enough restraint to avoid escalating the accusations. She worked through the sentences slowly. Outside, the city brightened. The first call came at 8. A board member, concerned but careful. Are you managing the situation? He asked. Yes. We need stability right now. You'll have it. He accepted the answer. Most people did. Because she rarely gave answers she couldn't deliver. After the call, she returned to the statement. Her laptop screen reflected faintly in the kitchen window. Behind the text, the city moved through its ordinary morning. People walking dogs, delivery trucks stopping at storefronts, someone jogging along the river path. Lives unfolding quietly beyond the glass. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her assistant. There was another development. A reporter had published photographs from the wedding reception. Her name in the caption. The article wasn't about the lawsuit this time. It was speculation. Who she attended with. The mystery man beside her in several photos. The internet had already started asking questions. She closed her eyes briefly. Of course it had. Attention always looked for new directions. A private moment rarely stayed private for long. Her assistant sent one more message. Do you want us to identify him or ignore it? The question sat on the screen. She thought about the cafe. Daniel sitting quietly with his forgotten cup of coffee. A man who had walked into her evening by accident. A man who had protected her privacy during her father's questions without being asked. A man whose life had nothing to do with public headlines. She typed her response. Ignore it. The assistant replied immediately. Understood. She closed the laptop. The statement was finished for now. Calls would fill the rest of the day. Crisis management. Strategy. Reputation. But for a moment, she stayed at the kitchen counter without moving. Her eyes drifted toward the small compartment beside the sink, where she had placed the 2 folded bills when she arrived home the night before. They were still there. $2. The smallest transaction she had made in years, and somehow the only one that hadn't felt like negotiation. She picked them up. The paper felt worn, ordinary. Her phone buzzed again. Another board member requesting an earlier call. The day was beginning to accelerate. She slipped the bills into her coat pocket, then grabbed her keys. Work would swallow the next 12 hours easily. Meetings, statements, damage control. The version of herself the world expected would handle all of it smoothly. She knew how to do that, but as she stepped out of the apartment and into the cold morning air, another thought lingered quietly beneath the noise of the day. Somewhere in the same city, a man was probably fixing a door or sanding a staircase, and later tonight, he would go home to a 7-year-old girl waiting with a drawing of a horse that looked like a potato. The thought didn't make sense in the middle of everything else happening, but it stayed with her anyway, not as distraction, as contrast. And sometimes contrast had a way of revealing things that control never could. The next few days moved the way storms usually do. Not constant thunder, just pressure that never completely lifted. Meetings filled the mornings, calls filled the afternoons. By evening, she usually found herself staring at the same documents again, looking for weaknesses other people might try to turn into headlines. The lawsuit stayed at the center of everything. The former partner continued speaking to reporters. Investors wanted reassurance. The board wanted control. None of that surprised her. She had lived inside pressure like this for years. What surprised her was something smaller. The photographs from the wedding kept circulating. Not major coverage, just fragments online. A few financial blogs, a few gossip columns trying to connect the story to the lawsuit. Most of the pictures showed her standing beside Daniel, sometimes sitting at the table, one taken from across the dance floor while she was dancing with her sister. Daniel stood behind her in that one, arms folded loosely, watching the room the same way he had all evening. Calm. The internet had already started building theories. Who he was, why he was there, whether he was connected to the company somehow. Her assistant asked twice if they should identify him publicly. Both times she gave the same answer. No. The truth would have sounded ridiculous anyway. A stranger in a cafe. $2. A wedding. The story would only create more noise. Still, the pictures stayed with her longer than she expected. Late one night, after the last call ended, she found herself looking at one of them again. Daniel near the window, the same quiet posture he had in the cafe, the same sense that he was present without trying to occupy space. She closed the image. The following morning began earlier than usual. An emergency board meeting had been scheduled. The accusation from the lawsuit had reached another round of headlines overnight. By the time she entered the conference room, several directors were already seated. Faces tight with concern, laptops open. Charts projected onto the large screen at the front of the room. The discussion started immediately. Financial exposure, legal strategy, media response. She spoke clearly, calmly. Every answer measured, every sentence designed to stabilize the situation. She had done this many times before. Halfway through the meeting, one of the board members leaned forward. "There's another issue," he said. "What issue?" "The press coverage." She waited. The photographs from the wedding, he continued. People are asking questions. The room shifted slightly, not dramatically, just enough to signal attention. What kind of questions, she asked. About judgment, he said carefully. The word hung there. Judgment. Another director spoke next. You've always been extremely disciplined about your public image. That's true. Showing up with an unidentified companion while the company is under scrutiny may create unnecessary speculation. The conversation moved in careful circles for several minutes. No one accused her directly, but the message was clear. Control the narrative. Limit unpredictability. Protect the company's image. She listened to everything, then answered calmly. He's not connected to the company, she said. That's good. He's not connected to the lawsuit. Also good. And the photographs were taken at a private family wedding. Silence followed. Finally, the chairman nodded. Very well. The meeting moved on, but the tension in the room had changed slightly. Not hostility, just caution. Afterward, she returned to her office. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out across the city. The river curved through the buildings below. For a moment, she stood there without moving. The board had not demanded anything. Not yet, but the direction was clear. Stability, control, distance from anything that looked unpredictable. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her assistant. More media requests. Another article speculating about the wedding photographs. She set the phone down. Across the river, the morning sun reflected off the water in thin, moving lines. For some reason, the memory returned again. Daniel sitting at the cafe window. Still. Unconcerned. The way he had handed the $2 back to her in the parking lot. That quiet refusal. Your father was trying to understand why you chose me. The sentence echoed in her thoughts. At the time, she hadn't had an answer. Now she realized something. Maybe she still didn't, and that uncertainty felt heavier than any boardroom question she had faced that week, because it had nothing to do with strategy, or reputation, or control. It had to do with something much simpler, why the calm presence of a stranger had made the noise of her entire life feel different. The thought lingered long after the meeting ended, and for the first time since the lawsuit began dominating her days, another decision slowly started forming beneath the surface of everything else. Not dramatic, not impulsive, just a quiet realization. She knew exactly where the cafe was. The cafe looked the same. That surprised her. For 3 days her life had been moving through crisis speed. Calls layered on calls, decisions stacking so quickly that hours blurred together. Yet this place had not changed at all. The same narrow windows. The same small tables pressed too close together. The same quiet hum of people working through their afternoons. She stood outside for a moment before going in. Not because she was unsure. Because the choice felt strangely personal. Boardrooms never felt like this. There, every action had context, strategy, measurable outcomes. This did not. Finally, she pushed the door open. The bell above it gave the same soft sound she remembered from earlier that week. Inside, the air smelled like roasted coffee and warm bread. People sat in familiar postures. Laptops open, books spread across tables, quiet conversations and low voices. For a second, she wondered if he might not be there. It would have made sense. He had never said this was a regular place. But then she saw the same chair near the window, and Daniel sitting in it, almost exactly the same way, a cup in front of him this time that still looked warm. Hands resting loosely around it. The same stillness. He noticed her a few seconds later. Not startled, just mildly surprised. She walked over. Hello, Daniel. He nodded once. Hello. The calm in his voice hadn't changed. May I sit? You don't have to ask. She pulled the chair out across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe noise filled the space between them. Finally he said, Did the wedding go well? Yes. Good. Another small pause. He studied her face for a second. You look tired. I've had a long week. That sounds likely. She folded her hands on the table. The photographs from the wedding made the news. He seemed to consider that. I assumed they might. You're not concerned. Daniel shook his head slightly. I didn't do anything wrong. No. He lifted the cup and took a slow sip. What brings you back here? He asked. She had been preparing answers to that question the entire drive across the city. Careful explanations. Reasonable justifications. None of them sounded right now that she was sitting here, so she said the truth instead. I wanted to see you again. Daniel didn't react dramatically. Just nodded once, like the statement made sense. That's kind of you. It's not kindness. No. No. She paused, searching for words that felt accurate. My life is structured, she said finally. I noticed. Everything has reasons, outcomes, explanations. That sounds complicated. It is. She looked at him directly. You were the only part of that evening that didn't have a reason. Daniel smiled faintly. You paid me $2. That wasn't the reason. No? No. The noise of the cafe shifted around them. Someone opened the door. Someone else left with a paper bag and a quick goodbye to the barista. Daniel rested his forearms on the table. Your father might disagree, he said. He probably would. You're bored too. She blinked slightly. You know about that. You're in the news sometimes, he reminded her. Right. She exhaled slowly. They would prefer predictable decisions. That sounds reasonable? It does. But predictable decisions don't always feel honest. The words settled between them. Daniel studied her face again. Why does this feel honest? He asked. She considered the question carefully. Because it deserved a real answer. Because you didn't ask for anything, she said. Most people don't ask. They imply. Daniel laughed quietly. That's probably true. A small silence followed. Then he glanced at the window briefly before looking back at her. I should tell you something. What? My life is not very exciting. I'm not looking for exciting. I repair things, he said. Old houses, broken stairs, doors that don't close properly. That sounds useful. It is. He paused. I also read bedtime stories about horses that look like potatoes. She smiled. That sounds important. He studied her expression for another moment. Your life is very public, he said. Yes, mine isn't. I know. That difference will cause problems. She nodded slowly. Yes. They both sat with that reality for a moment, not pretending it didn't exist, not trying to solve it immediately, just acknowledging it. Finally, Daniel said, so why take the risk? She leaned back slightly in the chair. The question felt similar to the one her father had asked at the wedding. Why did you choose him? At the time, she hadn't answered. Now she understood something she hadn't before, because the most carefully controlled version of her life had still left something empty. And for a few quiet hours at a wedding reception, a stranger had filled that space without even trying. She looked at him again. Because control isn't the same thing as living, she said. Daniel watched her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. That's true. Outside the window, the afternoon sun moved across the street. Inside the cafe, the same quiet rhythm continued. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about the next meeting, or the next headline, or the next decision someone expected her to make. She was simply sitting at a small table across from a man who had entered her life by accident. And somehow that accident had become the most honest moment she'd experienced in years. Daniel glanced at the clock on the wall. I have to pick Lily up from school soon. That makes sense? He stood. Then hesitated slightly. You're welcome to join us sometime, he said. The invitation wasn't dramatic, just open. She stood too. I'd like that. Daniel nodded. Good. He walked toward the door, then stopped briefly and looked back. You still owe me $2, he said. She frowned. I do? Yes. For what? Daniel smiled. For coffee next time. Then he stepped outside into the afternoon light. She watched him go, not with the uncertainty she had felt in the parking lot after the wedding. This time, the feeling was different. Not control, not strategy, just a quiet understanding. Some decisions didn't need perfect plans. They only needed the courage to stop performing long enough to choose something real.